This is an introduction to alchemy as a metaphor system, and I'm doing this from the point of view of embodied imagination. If you want to know more about embodied imagination, go to YouTube. There is another introduction to embodied imagination. This is an introduction to alchemy as it pertains to embodied imagination. I am going from a linear notion of alchemy. Now, alchemy is not linear. Alchemy, as you may think about it, is the transmutation from lead into gold. That is one of the goals that the alchemists had. Alchemy is a very, very long art. It is an art that goes back to the Egyptians. It's said to be part of the mummification process, the chemistry that was used for the mummification process. It's dye making. It has to do with working in the mines and mining things, getting metals, and all these things came together in an art form that became alchemy and was practiced actively till about the 17th century, and then there are people that say that it's still being practiced, but I'm going from an alchemy in its heyday, which was in about the 15th, 16th century, 15th century. Alchemy goes from the notion that the world was created by a creator God who, in order to create the world, had to withdraw from the all so that time could exist, because this creator God existed in eternity. So in order to create space-time, that creator God had to withdraw so space-time could come into being. Now, space-time, according to this notion, is organized around the sparks that were left behind by this creative spirit, and these sparks that were left behind in their cooling process would get a crust, and that crust is the matter that we know as matter. So the difference between alchemy and science, as I see it, is that when you go to the core of the atom, because many alchemists were atomists as well, when you go to the core of the atom in science, you get to energy. You get to pure energy. It's called nuclear energy. We all know about that. When you go through the crust, through heating, when you go through heating through the crust and you melt the crust in alchemy, you get to a place that is the spark that was left behind, the creative spark of inspiration that was left behind by the creator God. This is a story that we know in Jewish Kabbalah. It comes from many different cultures, this notion of the world where every element is organized around creative sparks. And the task of the alchemist was to loosen these creative sparks, to gather these creative sparks so that they would get the concentration of these creative sparks, which they call the tincture. The word tincture means coloring agent. And their notion was that you could create from these sparks, when you concentrated them, from these sparks you could create a tincture that first would turn white and then it would turn red. But it would go through many colors before. And as I said in the beginning, I take a linear notion of alchemy. The linear notion of alchemy is that it goes from one color to another color. Now, this is faulty because the alchemists were working on many processes at the same time. There were alchemical ovens that had 64 different compartments where 64 different processes at different heat were going on at the same time. So this notion of the linear progression is just a way to explain it to you. But all these processes can go on at the same time. These are simultaneous processes that I'm going to be explaining linearly. The way that I'm looking at it is that there were colors that moved from green to black to dark blue to light blue to white to yellow and to red. And I will explain to you as far as I understand these colors. Green where it begins, is the greening force of nature, as it is explained in the Splendor Solis, the greening force that makes everything turn green. In the springtime, it is what we call nature, it is what we call growth, that is all green. And it has also the notion of being green behind the ears, to be a greenhorn. It is also to be innocent. It is that innocence that with which life starts, in which you are innocent and everybody else does it to you. Then that innocence has to go through a process of disruption. Because in order to move forward, and in alchemy, in a sidebar, in alchemy they have the notion that every metal craves to become gold, and that the alchemist is supporting that craving. So that means that in alchemy the notion is that every element wants to increase in value, in the same way that many of us want to increase in value. Some people do it financially, and other people do it that they become more valuable human beings. That they see also happening in the metals, because the metals were alive. To alchemists, these metals are alive. There are no non-alive beings in the same way we have in dreams. In the dreams, everything is alive. So these metals were alive, but the transformation into gold would happen in geological time, and the alchemists couldn't wait because life is too short. So you had to hurry, but you had to hurry slowly because the work has to be done slowly and meticulously, and that's why the adage of the alchemists was, hurry slowly. And that way we could make gold in our lifetime. And that went through, and in order to get to the gold, first the innocent matter, the raw matter, the green matter, the greenhorn matter had to go through a process of rot. We know that in nature, anybody who has a garden knows that there's something called compost. That period of composting, that period of breaking apart, a period of called as putrefaction, is the black phase, the nigredo phase. And this is the black that is not a black of African black or that kind of sociological description of black. This is the black of death, Thanatos black. So it goes through this blackening, and in this blackening, it feels horrendous, and in the depth of that blackening, there are no more images. You just feel completely weighed down by the black, because that is a process where all the images disappear, where all your visions of the future disappear, where all your sense of self disappears, and you just feel rotten. That rotten state actually is work. That rotten state is work to work out of the innocent state through the rot into a new condition. The movement, first movement out of that black state, that nigredo state of rot, where there are no images, is the slow emergence of images, and these images are of grief, sadness, country songs, she took my car, she took my dog, loss, and that is seen as the blues. So that is the dark blues. Then you get into a period of the dark blues and everything feels heavy and sad. As you move through, and here you can see that the linear fantasy that I'm using is useless, but I'm using it anyway. As you move through the blues, then the blues turn lighter, and as they turn lighter, they become what alchemists call the Salem, written C-A-E-L-U-M, Salem. The Salem, the heaven, you get to the heaven of every element that you've been working. So now you're no longer at the crust that is on the outside. Now you are beginning to participate in the spark within. That is the heaven within. So every element, every molecule has its own heaven. So we're trying to work towards the heaven of the molecule, from which the molecule is constantly being created. Because this is a story of constant creation. It is not a creation that is finished, it is a creation that constantly goes on. And as you're in this state of constant creation, you get to the light blue. And as you're longer in it, in that light blue, then that light blue begins to turn white, silver. That is the first tincture. Silver is related to the moon, and it is related to the art of reflection. And you begin to be able to not just stay in your own perspective, your habitual perspective, but you can now move around on the other side of the mirror. On the other side of the mirror, there are other images taking place, and you can begin to experience these other images. If you want to know how to, go to the Embodied Imagination introduction elsewhere on YouTube. So you begin to experience the world on the other side of the mirror. And as you do that, your ability to reflect becomes more sturdy. Your reflection is no longer just all over the place, but your reflection becomes more focused, your silver becomes more focused, it becomes more condensed. You can hold it more. That's what we're doing in Embodied Imagination when you hold a variety of states at the same time. When you hold a variety of states at the same time, you begin to develop your ability to hold, your ability to contain. So as that happens, your the reflection begins to harden. You get a reflection that is cooler, that is more precise, that is more focused, and that is as the silver moves on. Once we have developed that silver state, this silver state cannot be brought into the world directly, because then you get what alchemy calls premature multiplication. Then that can happen, for instance, when somebody in a reflective moment has seen the coming of the Lord, and then from that moment on directly starts to convince others that the Lord has come. That in itself is a moment of premature multiplication. When that happens to you, when this amazing moment happens to you, when you are in that moment of reflection, and reflection has become very powerful, that is a moment where you hold it in your body, and that is the yellowing. The yellowing is the fermentation process. So you hold this experience or these experiences in your body long enough till these experiences become so strong that the body is now moving into action, but the action is no longer just acting out, no longer just adventure and doing things for reasons of adventure. It is that the image that you have worked, the inspiration that you have found in all these previous phases that comes in the white, that this inspiration enters into the body, and then from this yellow comes the sunrise, from this yellow comes the sunrise into what is called the rubedo, the red state, the solar state, in which this image can come into action, where this image gets strong enough that it begins to penetrate the world, because according to the alchemist, the world is porous. And if the inspiration is refined enough, strong enough, focused enough, then it can penetrate in its subtlety into the pores of the world, and it can start changing the world. And when it starts changing the world, we are in a state that is called rubedo. And because this is not a linear process, the process can start all over again, and we're back in being green from our rubedo, and we begin to think that this is the truth, and then we lose the sense of body and we make it into the truth, and once it becomes into the truth, it has to rot again so that it can become activated again, because at the moment that something is a solid, hard truth and no longer something that can change, something that can adapt to the world, that can make the world adapt to it, that then its potency begins to leave, and we're just with a truth that we hold for ourselves. We become rigid again, and in that rigidity that will have to melt again, and then we go through the nigredo once again. So in this process of movement, this ongoing movement from green to red, or whatever the order of states is, in that process of movement, we become refined. We become increasingly subtle, and as we become increasingly subtle, our ability to adapt to the world will increase, and we can help the world adapt to us. So it becomes a mutual process of adaptation, and that becomes increasingly subtle, and as that happens, you begin to go to a process of refinement, of a raising of value, which is the alchemical notion that everything craves to become gold. And that is a very brief description of the alchemical process, and I apologize to all the alchemists of old, to all the ancestors.